We start with a point.
Miracles of the mind, heart intelligence, helping individuals transform their energy to align with prosperity, accelerating the evolution of human consciousness while expanding our knowledge of the mind, soul, and body connection. Brought to you by Bigfish Energy Coaching Radio.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Kerrace, contacting you live, speaking with you live from Vancouver. It's a beautiful, beautiful day today. I have a wonderful quote for you that I'm going to share with you before our guest comes on. And I'm on Facebook right now, and it's a wonderful, wonderful medium. And I have a link to my Facebook page on my profile page here. And if you are interested in becoming a friend on Facebook, I really encourage you to do so. So the quote that I posted this morning on Facebook is this: the truth of who you are is forever unfolding and forever present in every moment. You are that which you seek. Seek no longer. Hear me now. You are unconditional love manifested in physicality. Here to learn the truth of that which is within you. Love, love, love. Be still in this moment and feel the love that's present within you and throughout you forevermore. So that is for you, all of the listeners who are listening live today, and anyone who is listening to this in the archives. Welcome to the show. So for the next hour, Rob and I are going to be discussing his book, Imagining the 10th Dimension, and the topic today is moving beyond the third dimension and imagining the 10th dimension. So Rob, I'm just going to do a little bio on you. And so Rob's been living in Saskatchewan all his life. You pretty much grew up there, is that correct?
Absolutely, yep.
Okay, great. And so born, bred, and still lives there. He is the owner of Talking Dog Studios, which specializes in audio and music for film and television. And for the last 6 years, Rob's company was responsible for the music and sound on one of the most successful scripted Canadian TV series of all time called Corner Gas. It's a comedy about living in the wide, open spaces of Saskatchewan. Now, in 2006, Rob published a popular science philosophy book about the nature of reality called Imagining the 10th Dimension. Famous science author Greg Bear, winner of both the prestigious Nebula and Hugo Awards, had this to say about Rob's new book. It's a fascinating excursion into the multiverse. Clear, elegant, personal, and provocative. Author and research scientist David J. Brown called Rob's book one of the most brilliantly conceived and mind-stretching books I have ever read. Rob's companion website for the book can be found at www.10thdimension.com. And this particular website that Rob developed has attracted 6 million, hear me out, 6 million unique visitors from around the world so far since its launch. And the audience for this project continues to grow. Rob recently has published a second book called O for Omniverse, which distills the ideas from his first book into poetry. Now that's a different perspective, with accompanying visuals by graphic artist Marilyn E. Robertson. You can go to Omniverse TV for more information about that particular project. Rob is definitely very, very busy. And if you do want to purchase his book directly from his website store, you'll also get a free DVD with the videos for a number of the songs that he's written. So without further ado, Rob, what I wanted to do is to delve into your book and ask you some of the questions. I've had an opportunity to read through quite a bit of the book. One of the things I really liked about it was that it was very user-friendly, because we're talking about something that for most people, can be very out there and scientific, right? So it can be intimidating for people. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's one of the things that I bring to it because, I try to make it very clear to everybody that I'm not a physicist. I'm not pretending to be a physicist, but I'm also a voracious reader and I guess what you'd call a generalist. I'm interested in a whole bunch of different topics, and that seems to be where Imagining the 10th Dimension has really turned into such a great passion for me because it shows me so many ways that I can bring all these ideas together.
That's great. Now, before we delve into any questions, what I want you to ask or answer for me is, based on your response to the book, because this is something you and I discussed earlier, and I thought was really key to start at the very beginning with, is what was the response from people that have been, what are the experiences and responses from people who have read your book?
Well, it's definitely, it's kind of like I'm holding a mirror up to people sometimes. That's the way I feel, because so many different people see different things in the book, and particularly in that 11-minute animation that, if you just type the words Imagining the 10th Dimension in at YouTube, you'll find this 11-minute animation that presents the ideas from Chapter 1 of the book, and that's definitely been the engine that has driven this project forward. People really love that video and are always sending it on and sharing it with each other. It's had millions of views on various streaming video websites. And it seems like, though, that some people look at that and say, well, obviously, this is where God is. By the time you get to the end of this video, they've shown you that God is in the 10th dimension. And other people say, well, what I've seen there is an explanation of every psychedelic experience I've had in my life. And other people say, well, clearly, when I look at the helix that Rob is using, I can tell that this is all about Cabala and the tree of life. And so it really does feel like what I've created is a vessel that so many people around the world are finding different ways to be able to drop their own belief system into that vessel and see things that resonate for them.
Well, that's great. Interesting story. Now, your book is bridging science and spirituality. Is that correct?
Sure. Physics, philosophy, science, spirituality, metaphysics. It's a very big basket that we're playing with there.
Okay, super. So how did you come up with this way of visualizing the dimensions?
Well, part of it was definitely just through this obsession that I had developed as a child. But it also, another reason that I came up with it was because I was working as a composer on a musical, not really a musical, a play with music in it, that I was writing the music in, and a very accomplished playwright by the name of Jeffrey Ursell was writing the text for it. And it was a show that we were working on in the early 80s that was called The Cave. And Jeffrey's idea was that this was going to be a cave 20,000 years in the future where the last remnants of mankind were just gathering whatever was left of the evidence of our existence on the Earth before they were being forced to leave the planet forever because of the cataclysmic failure of the planet because of our presence there. And in the 80s, that sort of environmental consciousness still was a little bit unfashionable. It was something that probably would be a much easier sell nowadays. But as I was discussing this play with Jeffrey, at the end of the show, the main protagonists of the show are rescued, and I was wanting to portray, maybe there's a way for us to portray that this rescue happens from one of the alternate universes where the Earth hadn't died, where the right decisions had been made. And so it was around then that I had finally developed this way of drawing it all out on napkins. And I remember sitting in a coffee shop in Regina and drawing all these lines and branches and folds and things. 3 becomes 1 as a point in the 4th dimension and continues up in this repeating cycle. And I showed it all to Jeffrey, and he just sort of looked at me quizzically, like he didn't really think where I was going with this was relevant to his play. And as the composer, I was really talking about something that was not my business. I was just supposed to be writing the music for the words that he had written for this show. But it was around then that I finally had gotten to the point where this conceptualization that I'd come up with had been developed to the point where I now had something that I was able to talk through with people. And that's how I went from the 80s, 90s, and up to 2005. Just anybody who would listen, I'd be drawing these little diagrams out. So by the time it came time to create the 11-minute animation, I had my pattern down pretty good. And a lot of people like the 11-minute animation because they feel like there's a density to it. There's a repetition that keeps happening that reinforces similar ideas, but shows a hierarchy, so that by the time you get to the 10th dimension, you've been sort of taken it through it one step at a time in a way that for most people might just kind of blow their mind the first time, but after they've watched it a few times, it starts to really resonate for them. And I have to say, the 11-minute animation, that's the most common comment I get, is people write and say, "You just blew my mind." That was an amazing experience just to watch that video.
Great. Okay, great. Now, what is a point line plane? What is a point line plane?
That's actually another one of the interesting things that happened. Is when I first came up with this project, I had all these things that I had arrived at through intuition, and for instance, this idea of the universe branching out. I'd not heard of Everett's many worlds interpretation at that point, but it turns out that that's what I was describing, and that has become. From the time that he first proposed it in 1957, it sort of was ignored for decades and then has gradually started to enter into mainstream physics, so that now there are lots of mainstream physicists who say that's indeed what happens when you observe one reality over another. The universe splits into a new version of itself and you come along for the ride. The point line plane postulate, if you look that up, just type those words into Google, you'll find that is an accepted way of describing any number of spatial dimensions. And it turns out that my approach to visualizing the dimensions is very connected to that. Now, if you just get a pencil and paper in front of you here, if you just draw a single point on a piece of paper, and then draw a second point, and draw a line through that, what you've defined there is a way of thinking about a spatial dimension. Those 2 points are within a spatial dimension. Now, if you're starting right at the beginning, you've just shown a representation of the first dimension. Now you want to draw another point, but it can't be on that line. And of course, what we're really talking about there, this is a line segment. The geometry buffs will want me to say that the line that passes through those points extends to infinity in either direction. But let's not try and deal with an infinite-sized piece of paper here. We'll just draw a line that connects those 2 points together. If you now draw another point that isn't on that line, what you've just drawn is a way of thinking about how to get to the next spatial dimension up. And that would be like your entire paper now would become that plane that represents those 3 points, and that would become the second dimension. And if you
can draw that line anywhere on your line?
Yeah, basically the first point and the second point are on a line. As long as you draw the third point not on the line, but someplace else on the piece of paper, now you've got basically 2 lines. And those 2 lines, if you imagine them expanding out in either direction, they're defining a plane that is basically like this flat piece of paper that you're drawing on. And if you imagine the edges of that paper extending to infinity in the 4 directions that are the the sort of the north, south, east, west of that paper, if you're imagining it as a map, that would be the second dimension. And again, this is the point line plane postulate we're talking about here. And if you now just hold your pencil in the air and think of yourself drawing a point in space, just floating in the air above it, that would be how you would get to the next dimension up. And now you've got a representation of the third dimension. So the thing about the point line plane postulate is it's not just a way to visualize dimensions 1, 2, 3. it's a way to imagine any number of dimensions. So if you were to say now that the line that you first drew wasn't the first dimension but was the fourth dimension, then you could imagine that flat piece of paper extending out infinity in the four directions would be the fifth dimension, and you holding your pencil in the air and drawing a point in the air would be the sixth dimension. And that's basically the logic that my presentation uses. It keeps using the logic of spatial dimensions to show you a way of how to imagine all of the 10 spatial dimensions that are there, just building it one idea at a time. It's kind of like when you try to imagine the size of an atom, and then you try to imagine the size of the planet Earth, and you try to imagine the size of the galaxy. There's no way for you to hold those concepts in your mind at the same time. But if you take it up, through a hierarchy where you imagine an atom, and then you imagine a molecule, and you keep going step by step, you can imagine yourself getting from that tiny, tiny little atom out to something much larger. But our brains aren't really designed for thinking of those sorts of really widely separated concepts. We work better in hierarchies. We work better taking things a step at a time. So that's the visualization technique that I'm using to allow us to get out to the 10th dimension.
Right. So basically, the point line plane postulate, you've just explained basically how it relates to your approach.
Yeah, it's another one of those things that I had never heard of when I created my project, but now that I've been shown it by fans of the project who, as I was saying, all these different people keep coming to me saying, I see a way that what you're talking about resonates for me. And the point line plane postulate is a good example of how, some people look at my project and say, Rob's talking about spatial dimensions, and then suddenly he's talking about temporal dimensions by the time you get to the fourth dimension and above. And it's important that people understand that what I'm talking about are spatial dimensions, and that's what physicists are talking about as well. It's just trying to imagine a spatial dimension that has 9 dimensions all at the same time. With the third dimension, basically there are 6 directions that you can think of as being within the third dimension. Up, down, forward, backward, left, right. And there's lots of other words you could use to describe those 6 directions in the third dimension. By the time you're trying to imagine the 9th dimension, you're trying to imagine 18 directions that are all at right angles to each other. And again, if you just jump right to that from here, we're just not wired to be able to imagine that kind of a visualization. And that's why, some physicists have just come out and flatly said, there's really no way for you to imagine 10 spatial dimensions. You can't do that because it's beyond comprehension. And, people who have worked through my visualization say, well, no, there is a way to do it. You just have to take a step at a time. You can't do it all at once.
Right. Great. Well, thank you for explaining that in more detail for us non-scientists. So many physicists have said time is an illusion. How does that relate to this project?
That's an interesting one because, in fact, the June issue of Scientific American, again, it says right on the cover, is time an illusion? It's something that seems to come up time and time again, and it seems to be one of the sticking points where a lot of people can't accept that time is an illusion. For you to accept that requires you to accept that there's something outside of our space-time where everything that we're experiencing right now and are about to experience and have experienced is already happening simultaneously. And that idea of timelessness is something that people like Albert Einstein, all through his life, he kept trying to portray this idea of timelessness to people. One of his favorite things he said is the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. And, he liked to say that we tend to describe our experience of moving through time and think that that's the actual description of what's happening. And it's not. It's more of like a limited perspective. It's like if you were sitting on a train and looking through a cardboard tube out the window as you were traveling in the train, you could convince yourself that there was just this tiny, tiny little world that you were looking at that was what you were seeing through the tube, because you wouldn't be able to see the rest of the landscape that you were traveling through. And that's what we're really talking about here. And the thing that's important about that is when we start to talk about spatial dimensions and extra dimensions, then is, you know, when you have this image of yourself being on a train track, you could start to convince yourself that means there's only one past and there's only one future, and there's some locked-in destiny that we're being forced to move towards with no choice. You know, the hard determinist viewpoint that says some chemical reactions were set in motion at the Big Bang that are continuing to happen right till now and will continue to happen. And as those chemical reactions happen in your brain or my brain, we think we have free will, but we don't. And you know, the point I'm trying to make with people is, if you believe there's nothing beyond the fourth dimension, then it's easy for you to think that we are on a train track where there is no choice and where there is a locked-in future that you have no chance of being able to break free from, because there is only one future. By the time you start to imagine that there's these branching possibilities happening in the fifth dimension, then you start to see just how much control we really have to be able to change where we're going and what's happening to us and what things are affecting us. And it gets even crazier from there, because quantum physics says that it's just as true in the reverse direction. There's multiple paths as well that we could have traveled through to get to our current present, and there's no reason why the past needs to be as locked in either. And that's an important thing for somebody who feels like something happened in their past that has locked them into a certain repeating pattern that they're being trapped in right now. If you can imagine that the past is fluid as well, you have a way to imagine how easy it is going to be for you to be able to break out of those patterns and move into a better future.
Yeah, I think you make some very important points, key points here, in that it's because of our conditioning and programming, one, and also because of the fact that we aren't told or taught these things, right?
Yes.
And so, you know, if we were taught the things that you're talking about right now, and people could, but I think that because of the times that we're in right now, people are going to see that this is the new reality, right? Or this is another perspective, you know, and it's and people, that we do have control over our future, you know, that we are actually co-creators.
Absolutely.
We're creator beings, you know. We need to come to that understanding that we are actually creator beings, and that we do have a creative or an active role in what we want to create for our future. And that's a big part of this whole thing about going into the fifth dimension. Would you agree?
Absolutely. You know, and talking about Albert Einstein too, he was convinced that our reality does come from the fifth dimension. It was proposed to him back in 1919 by a fellow named Kaluza, and Albert did. He sat on the idea for a couple of years, but he eventually gave it his full endorsement. Now, how is it that for 100 years, almost 100 years, the smartest man in the 20th century, according to a lot of people's estimates, believed that our reality comes from the fifth dimension, and yet none of us were taught that. You know, all through school, the fifth dimension was completely ignored, and it just seems to me like there's something very strange about that the fifth dimension has been portrayed, as I said in the blog entry you mentioned today, the fifth dimension is portrayed to a lot of people as a band from the 60s, and that's about it.
That's about it. That is about it. I love that in your blog entry. That is beautiful. So I didn't realize that Albert Einstein actually had said that our reality is created from the fifth dimension, really.
Yep.
So that's just information we just haven't been privy to. So how does that affect us if we've been in the third dimension and now we're into the fourth dimension? But as we were in the third dimension for quite some time, our reality was actually the fifth dimension, but now we're moving into the fifth dimension. So how is that going to impact our reality? It's just going to come into balance, or?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, I think it's important for us to make sure we understand that the third dimension is where our physical bodies will remain. Our physical bodies are made out of three-dimensional atoms and molecules. So it's really our, at most, the fifth dimension for us, from our third-dimensional perspective, remains this tiny little window, kind of like the looking through the tube on the train. But knowing that the fifth dimension is connected to all these other possibilities is something that we can mentally achieve, spiritually achieve, and basically it's like you're trying to imagine now, how big are you making that cardboard tube that you're looking through? The more you start to see the horizon of the fifth dimension, the more you start to connect to the other things that are happening around you, the other people that are also starting to wake up, the more you start to tune into those beautiful synchronicities. All of us have had those days when everything seems to be clicking and the universe is just providing things to us. All of those are part of the connections that are available to us through the fifth dimension. But again, our physical bodies are always going to be back in the third dimension. So as we're talking about a growth to the extra dimensions, we're still more talking about consciousness than we are talking about, a physical motion of our bodies.
Great. I'm glad that you clarified that. That's beautiful. So it's the consciousness that's evolving to the fifth dimension.
Yep.
Yeah.
And strangely enough, that the idea that we're already in the fifth dimension makes perfect sense through so many other different systems of spirituality, but also through things like the holographic universe theory, which is also receiving a lot of renewed interest nowadays. It talks about how interference patterns in the fifth dimension are what are creating the reality that we're observing around us. So again, this fifth dimension thing seems to keep coming up over and over, and yet where is the mainstream media talking about the fifth dimension? I don't see it. I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't see it either. But anyway, that's why people like yourself and shows like this and other shows that sort of more grassroots can bring this information forward so we can start educating ourselves, because we cannot rely on mainstream media. I don't watch television. I don't watch news anymore. I listen to a lot of alternative news, and I encourage my listeners to do that as well. And that we are going to need to rely more and more on those who are forward thinking and have new insights and wisdoms to share, and also to be able to look within ourselves and find the answers within, right? Just like you did. You came up with this information. We all each have a piece of the puzzle.
That's a wonderful point. Yes. Like I want everybody to make sure that they understand that I'm not saying I have all the answers. I came up with this one great tool, this great visualization technique that a lot of people have found useful, but I don't have all the answers, and I'm not going to pretend that I do. But it's been such a joy to me. I feel thankful every day as all these people keep coming back to me and saying, what you showed me has really opened my eyes, has really provided me with a new way of understanding how I can get out of the problems in my life. And one of the things that has been happening lately is I'm hearing from more and more teachers who are showing my video in classrooms and finding that it's a really, really useful tool for just getting kids to open up and talk about the things that they've been thinking about, but they never verbalize. There seems to be so much of this kind of stuff that is now coming into us that a shared experience, a consensus reality is starting to grow, where everybody's starting to connect together into all these different ways of thinking about where our reality is starting to grow into. And, what I have is just one little piece of the puzzle, which I'm thrilled to have, but it's not the whole answer. It's just a piece of the puzzle.
Right. And it's a very important piece, so thank you. So back to some of the questions I wanted to ask you. Is time really in the fourth dimension?
Well, time is a direction. So if you were to say, is up in the third dimension, is forward in the third dimension, well, it's a spatial dimension you're talking about, so you could say the third dimension is east-west, or you could say the third dimension is up-down, or and it's the same thing with the fourth dimension. There's some people that have said ana and kata are the two words that you should use to describe the directions in the fourth dimension. It's important, if you are going to say that time is the fourth dimension, then you have to recognize that there's an interchangeability there, and you also have to recognize that that's only half the equation. Time is a direction. There's an opposing direction, just as there's an up and down and an east-west. There's a time and an anti-time, and there's, again, that's a mainstream science idea. There's really no reason, physics-wise, that time is moving in the direction that it is only. It can move in either direction. The reason we experience it as moving in the direction that we feel that it is because we're made out of chemical reactions that are obeying the laws of entropy. We're moving in that direction, but the other direction is just as real and just as valid. And again, if you think about one of the ideas that I talk about in my animation is 2D Flatlanders. Flatland being a book that was written way back in the late 1800s to help people start to imagine the spatial dimensions. A flatland creature would be only two-dimensional. He would be like he was on an impossibly flat piece of paper. And for him, I say time would be in the third dimension, because time is really just a way of describing change. If you were in the sixth dimension, you would say time and anti-time were in the seventh dimension. But you could also call it forward and backward. It's limited thinking to say time is only in the fourth dimension. But it's for the purposes of discussion with people, it's where most of us are used to thinking about time. So if you're starting to talk about this, you can say time's in the fourth dimension, but really time is across all the dimensions, or as it can be in any of the dimensions, just as forward and backward can be in any spatial dimension.
Right, great. That's excellent. My next question, though, is your project insists that our now is in the fifth dimension rather than the fourth. What do you mean by that?
Well, first of all, it's important to understand that although we feel like we're experiencing a continuous reality, we know that it's actually in tiny little Planck-length sized points, and that's a physics idea. It's a consciousness idea as well. There's been lots of studies that indicate that our consciousness is actually happening in frames. And what that means then is, as you're experiencing the fourth dimension, which, as we just said, you can call time, but you can call it lots of other things too. Duration is a good word to call the fourth dimension from our third dimensional experience. What feels like a continuous reality is actually all these tiny little frames. And when physicists talk about the fifth dimension, a lot of them say the fifth dimension is not this huge, wide expanse that encompasses the fourth dimension. It's actually curled up at this tiny, tiny little measurement, which they as I said, is called the Planck length. It's the tiniest measurement possible, because when you try to measure anything smaller than that, it falls into indeterminacy, quantum indeterminacy, where the word length no longer has any meaning. So it's important then, if you're thinking about the fifth dimension as being curled up at the Planck length, to understand that is for the experience of our physical bodies. And the reason we feel like it's all curled up and tiny like that is because of this non-continuous nature of reality. And it's kind of like then, if you're imagining the train track, every one of those points is another junction, another place where the train track can branch off to another possibility, another potential reality. And that's not to say that the probabilities and possibilities are absolutely limitless. They're still defined by the previous point, but it's still a much broader range of possibilities that we can be branching to as we move through the fifth dimension in those frames that are one Planck length at a time. Planck, P-L-A-N-C-K, named after the fellow who came up with the concept.
Max Planck.
Yep. Or Planck, I guess, is It's kind of like Einstein. If you're pronouncing it the way they did in their original language, you should be saying Einstein and Planck.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, this is in total layman terms and in terms of how I understand the now. So you're saying that the now is the fifth dimension. Being in the present moment, being in the now is the fifth dimension.
Right. And the fifth dimension is kind of like an octave resonant point. If you draw out all 10 dimensions, if you just go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, draw all those numbers on top of each other, right at the halfway point is the fifth dimension. So if you're thinking that we're somehow rooted between the 0 and the 10 with a vibration that is happening, then the strongest focal point of that vibrating string, other than the one that goes right from 0 to 10, is at the fifth dimension.
That's beautiful. Wow, this is really interesting. Wow, this is really, really interesting. Okay, so now that goes back to explain what you were saying, how we've always been in the fifth dimension, or our reality has always been in the fifth dimension, but we were living in the third dimension, but really didn't have the knowledge of the fifth dimension. Is that correct? Exactly. And now that we're moving into the fifth dimension, in terms of consciousness, that is the all. It is actually the place that, see, this is the tricky thing. I'm just thinking out loud here. But, this is what they say that, I have this piece that I impart to people, or the basis of all the work that I do is that we are all to learn what I consider the universal language of love. And so in that, that this universal language of love, and one of the things I say is that this universal language of love has been accessible to people, to mystics like or teachers like Buddha or Jesus, And so they were those mystics and teachers were able to be in the now, the fifth dimension, and teach from that place. Now, I say, in terms of all my work, a foundation piece of all my work, the next step in humanity's evolution is to learn what I call the universal language of love. Is that we all will have access to reaching that state of consciousness that mystics like Buddha and Jesus and prophets, that is attainable for all of us at this particular time in history.
Absolutely. But I want to make sure it's important to understand that the fifth isn't where it stops. It's just as you move back beyond the fifth into the sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, what you're doing then is starting to acknowledge all the other possibilities that aren't part of your own reality and starting to connect to all those. By the time you get to the 10th, you're not just connecting to our universe or our reality and its potentials. You're connecting to all the universes. You're connecting to all the information patterns, or Richard Dawkins called them memes, information patterns that connect across and outside of time and space. And so if you're talking about an ultimate enlightenment, that means you are trying to move towards the 10th dimension. But the fifth dimension is the focal point for our physical reality.
Yes, and that's beautiful. And thank you so much for explaining that. I have a big smile on my face. Really, this what I see that this is about humanity reclaiming their power back. That we all have the ability, the capability of doing that now, and that we do not have to sit back and feel victimized by our circumstance, or feel that we are moving into a space in our evolutionary cycle where we can become co-creators of the world in which we want, not the world in which that has been given to us, right?
I think the thing that I was thinking about, I was working on a new blog entry this morning about the connection between gravity and all this. And here's a thought for you. Think of gravity as love. And what I mean by that is, right now, if you're thinking about that timeless perspective where everything has happened, is happening, is already happened, and anything that is about to happen is already there within that timelessness, there's already a version of our universe that exists out there that we're moving towards. The universe that blows up tomorrow isn't there drawing us forward as much because it isn't there as long. The version of my own life and your life and everybody else's life where we thrive and survive and have the happiest life already exists out there within timelessness. And the version of the all our family and friends and the people we care for is already out there drawing us forward. And physicists say that gravity is the only force that exerts itself across the extra dimensions. So think of love, then, that nurturing spirit that wants to draw us forward as being a kind of gravity, something that is already there, and the things that don't survive, the bad things that fail, aren't there because they fail, they disappear, they aren't part of the future for us.
That's very interesting. So what would you call, I'll just take this a little step further then, what would you call, like, for me, I'm at the point where every breath that I take, breath, and I breathe in breath, I breathe in love. So what I'm saying is that the very breath that we're taking, every breath that is taken in is I breathe. What I'm breathing is love. So that to me is the all. That love, and I say that love permeates all that exists. Now, someone else may experience that as joy or whatever, but I'm honestly stating this, and it's my truth and my reality at this point in my life. Hasn't been always this way. But every breath that I take, I'm breathing in love. Is that the same thing as your gravity perspective?
Absolutely. And the other thing about us as living beings is the connection between water and this, the life-giving forces and the mystical qualities of water. If you're thinking about the timeless perspective, we're already all connected through the water that we share here on planet Earth, and that water has been in us and through us and shared with us across timelessness. So air is the same thing, the air that we breathe, the water that is all around us and connects us back to the very first living thing. Every living thing on planet Earth uses water. So again, if you're thinking about just taking a drink of water and thinking about that, having the same kind of thing that you're talking about with a breath of air, what you're connecting to is that timelessness that is always going to be there and has always been there, and that we share as living things. Interesting.
It's great. Beautiful. Okay. So my next question is, I see your blog, on your blog, that you have there's a team of scientists from Oxford who recently oversaw a project that presents your version of the fifth dimension. Can you tell us about the fifth dimensional camera project?
This was actually presented by two people, John Ardern and Anab Jain, and they wrote to me earlier this year and said how much they liked my project, and I didn't really hear much more from them after that until they actually sent me the blog entry that they had published showing what they had created. And the fifth dimensional camera project is a fanciful presentation of what a scientific instrument might look like if we were able to show you all these branching possibilities that are happening in the fifth dimension. And the thing that is so wonderful about this project for me is John and Anab actually showed this as part of the consultation process of creating this presentation to a number of well-known and respected physicists from Oxford University. And for me, it just seems like another example of how we are now moving towards a place where maybe this fifth dimensional idea is not going to be ridiculed, because those Oxford scientists didn't say, no, don't make this presentation. They said, that's an interesting idea. You go ahead and make that presentation. We give it our blessing. So, for me as the prairie boy out here in the middle of the Canadian prairies with no chance of connecting these ideas to the world, to now see scientists at Oxford University saying, yes, that looks like an interesting idea. You go ahead and make that presentation. It just seems like a major step forward for the possibilities of this someday being something that could be taught in schools.
Oh, I believe it will be. I think you're definitely onto something here. So it's just a matter of time. You know, you're pioneering something here. So usually when you're pioneering, it takes a little bit of time before everyone catches on. You're definitely at the forefront of something very important, and it's definitely, its time will come, I think, very, very soon. Very soon.
I just wanted to say the other thing that I think is really interesting, as we're talking about how things are growing and changing, is it's easy to convince yourself that maybe that's just a self-delusion, that we're all just sort of sharing a beautiful dream that isn't going to really happen. And the one thing that I thought was a really great example of a definite change that is happening is an article that was published in Wired magazine a few months ago about the placebo effect, and the fact that drug companies are now really wrestling with the fact that the placebo effect is becoming much stronger. People who are taking the sugar pill in these controlled studies are experiencing the healthful benefits that the drug that they're comparing it with is also supposed to be experiencing. And we're talking about roughly twice as effective right now. And according to this article, right now, if you were to do clinical studies of Prozac, it probably wouldn't get approved because Prozac is currently no longer any more effective in clinical studies than a sugar pill. Isn't that amazing?
Wow. It's brilliant.
So
but
things are changing.
I also believe this is happening because of the new energies that we're moving into.
Absolutely. That's what I think.
And, it's changing people's physicality. My physicality is changing. I feel internally stronger, But, and I'm noticing I'm very, very in tune with the wave of new energies that are coming onto this planet right now, and we're we're going to be moving into some very interesting times now. And a lot of things that I talk about when I share and some of the segments that I do is that the real importance of bringing ourselves into balance. Because unless we do that, we're not going to be able to sustain these new energies that are coming in. So I really encourage people in all of my shows to make sure that they're, eating the high vibrational foods. They're, thinking positively and staying away from negativity, doing the internal emotional work, and doing, all kinds of things that you can be doing, anything you can be doing that's going to be positive for your body and strengthen your physical being, and also mental being and emotional being,
That's great advice.
They're all very, very important during these times that we're moving into. And also to immerse yourself in shows like the one that we're having the experience of sharing today, and other alternative types of information that can enrich your soul, enrich your being, not, bring you down like all the stuff that's being shown to us through the media in terms of all the negativity. So
yes,
that's
and fear-based information.
Yes, fear-based, because we are moving into a period where there is so much opportunity, and the fear can be so overwhelming. And it's really important that we don't lose sight of the opportunity that is before us, because it is simply a wonderful time, I believe, to be alive. One of the most profound opportunities in human history. So I have a few more questions here, and so some people have looked at the Helix logo you created for this project and suggested, that's the Helix logo that's on your book, and suggested that you're really talking about the Cabala and the Tree of Life. And what do you think about that?
Well, again, it's kind of like the people who came to me, and said that my project is about psychedelics. I have no experience with psychedelics at all, so I can say that's wonderful information. Thank you for telling me that, but it's not what I was setting out to do. Cabala is another one of those things that fascinates me, because the more I've been told about it, the more it seems like I somehow was arriving at very similar conclusions. And to the extent that I've done this a few times in my blog, where I've actually superimposed the Tree of Life over top of the Helix and shown just how similar they are, and how at the point that I created the logo for my project, I'd never even seen the Tree of Life. But when we're talking about this idea of there being these three triads, the first through third dimension in my system being a physical triad of dimensions, the fourth through sixth being kind of the moral, the choice-based dimensions, and then the seventh through ninth being the memes, the information patterns. In Cabala, they also divide the tree of life up into triads, and there's a physical triad, there's a moral triad, there's an intellectual triad. It just seems to me like another one of those examples of if you manage to figure out a way to reveal an underlying truth, then there are going to be all these other ancient pieces of wisdom and spirituality that have also revealed the same truth. And for me, that's all I've been trying to do. I feel like this is an artistic presentation that I'm working on here that reveals a personal truth, just the same as any other artist would say. I'm trying to show what's real to me, because when I show what's real to me, that resonates with the other people who have an essential understanding that is similar to my own.
Right, great. Now, how does this project relate to the law of attraction?
It's interesting because we were just talking a few minutes ago about this idea of love and gravity. The other thing that gravity can make you think about is how wave patterns can entrain each other. Like the meditation techniques that actually allow you to bring your wave patterns in your mind down to different frequencies through using repeating patterns within the sounds that you're listening to in headphones as you meditate. If we're thinking about the law of attraction, it can be a similar sort of a gravitational entrainment that we're talking about, where if there is something that you tune your mind to, then that entrainment can be sort of like the gravity that draws you towards it. Again, if gravity is the only force that works across the extra dimensions, and that attraction that you're imagining yourself moving towards exists already out there within the probability space beyond the fourth dimension, then we have another way of thinking about how within this approach to visualizing the dimensions, the law of attraction could actually have an easily visualized way of occurring.
Wow, that's beautiful. And you talked about synchronicities. And so as we move in more and more into these frequencies, into these energies, or the consciousness level is raising up to the fifth dimension, that we're going to see the manifestation happening a lot faster. It probably is happening for a lot of people, and I do know that I do talk to some of my clients, and and I see even in the clients that I work with, because I do life and business coaching, that they're able to move a lot faster than some of my clients in the past because of the times that we're in right now. So even though there's that feeling that time is speeding up, it's that we're moving into these higher frequencies, and so we're able to manifest a lot faster and do more and be more in our lives. So
yes. I think it's interesting to think about what it must be like now to be a child and to be part of this acceleration that's already much further along for them, and how they're on this accelerating curve that is going to be growing even more quickly. For people who are further down their life path. I'm 55, so I've seen a lot more of the slow part of the curve. If I were 10 right now, imagine where I'm going to be as things are moving forward here.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, and so it's really important that that these kids have like their current system and structure doesn't really support them, as they're growing up, because it's an archaic system, right?
Yes.
So hopefully it's going to have an overhaul, and it will change quite a bit fairly quickly, so that these kids can have the tools and support that they need in order to embrace the change and the opportunity that is before them.
I think there's some interesting things that have already happened. There's a lot of things that we're talking about here that definitely connect back to Oriental wisdom and that those ancient approaches to life. And it's interesting how many children have grown up now playing Japanese video games where they've been subtly introduced to some of those concepts, and it's the same with anime. There's some really amazing shows out there that in the anime world that present concepts of multidimensionality and the probability space that we're moving through in ways that are helping kids to expand their minds into those ideas in ways that I think are going to be really useful to them as adults.
Interesting. I didn't know that. That's interesting. So, Rob, how much control do we really have over our path, and how much is predetermined?
Well, there's definitely, for me, the idea that things are absolutely limitless. I discourage people from deluding themselves. I can't. If I were to have had a car accident where I lost my arm, I'm not going to be able to suddenly grow a new arm because I, concentrate on it or I use the law of attraction. But there's still, having said that, there's so much more possibility out there that you can connect to if you open your eyes to where you could be going, and if you keep your mind on the idea that there is already a version of you that has made the best choices and has thrived and has broken out of whatever negative loops might be keeping you where you are now. That definitely is, one of the things that we need to make sure people do understand, because there's been sort of a grim satisfaction, some of us have been taught through school to take in the idea that the universe doesn't care about us at all, that we are meaningless, that the universe is going to end in a meaningless heat death of maximum entropy, that it all means nothing, and that's not something people should be taught, but it's something they have been taught for many decades now, and it's one of those things that what we're talking about today. As people are waking up to those possibilities, they are starting to see how much control they have over where they can be heading right now.
Yes, that's beautiful, and that is going to be so critical for people not to lose hope and not to and feel discouraged or feel like the world is going to end, because we are moving into a very intense period in our history here, and so you have to be able to keep things in perspective. Yeah, for sure.
I agree. Yeah, we haven't really talked about the 26 songs I wrote as part of this project, but that's, as a songwriter and a creative person, that's actually one of the things that has been a driving force for me as well. And one of the songs that I wrote is called See No Future, and it's about that hopelessness that happens when you feel like there's no way out, when there's no point, where you're trapped and it's going to be the same forever. And if that's a debilitating state to be trapped in, and we need to help people to see that there's always a way out, no matter what your situation.
I tell my listeners a lot that this physical reality that we live in is really, it provides an opportunity for you to evolve your soul, and that any negative experiences that you are going through is really just a call. It's a call for you to awaken to the fact that something is not right in your life, and that you need to right whatever is wrong in your life, and that once you begin that journey, you can, and then you start seeing the examples of all the successes that you're having in your life, then you can start seeing life from a different perspective. I honestly believe that we're moving to a period where we can have much more joy, much more happiness, and much more prosperity, much more opportunity than we could ever anticipated in our existence on this planet. So I think it's a beautiful time to be alive. I don't look at it as a horrible time, but then again, I've done a lot of work to get to the place of where I'm at, to come to that understanding. And so that's why I'm here, to support others on their journey, because I believe that our future is bright. I believe that we have a future that we could never, before us, that we could never possibly imagine. And we don't know what it's going to be like, but we do have the ability to be co-creators of our future. So.
Right. I'm a big believer in the importance of gratitude, of giving thanks for what you have right now. And I'm also a big believer in trying to always find ways to enhance your sense of wonder, to open yourself back up to the beautiful things that are around you. It's actually one of the mindfulness meditation techniques that I was introduced to. I'm a latecomer to meditation, but it was one of the techniques that definitely resonated for me, because it's one of the things, as a creative person, I've always been trying to find ways to reawaken that childlike sense of wonder. And when you have that, things are moving forward for you. There's no question that when you're engaged in that way with your reality, as a child is engaged with their reality, that you're moving to a better version of you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So there's a couple of more questions here before we wrap things up, Rob. It's been a great time spending here with you in terms of learning more about your book, and your wisdom and knowledge has been very, very interesting. And your book, it's such a simple read. That's what I really enjoy about it. So thanks again. But one of my last two questions is, in your blog you talk a lot about scientific theory called Everett's world interpretation.
Right.
As I understand it, this theory says that our universe splits apart with every decision we make. Is that really what science says?
It is. It's also it connects to the quantum idea of do you know this the visualization of Schrodinger's cat? The idea that there's this cat that is trapped in a box who is simultaneously alive and dead. Have you heard that story?
No, never. Interesting.
It's actually a thought experiment that was proposed many years ago to try to portray just what is so strange about the quantum world. And this quantum world is one of the most proven aspects of our reality, which is that at the quantum level, at the tiny, tiny level that we were talking about before, down at this Planck length, particles can be in one state or another state, or they can be simultaneously in both states. And when you're talking about that, you're talking about the quantum wave function, where there's this wave that is happening that represents all the possibilities that could be ways of expressing that particle. In fact, one of the terms I've grown to love is wavicles to describe that, because particles are essentially waves, but because they're chopped up by this frames of the Planck length, everything can be a wave or a particle depending upon the way that you observe it. So when we're talking about Everett's interpretation of that, what he says, this thought experiment says that the cat that's in the box is simultaneously alive and dead because of a quantum particle decaying, but because you haven't observed the box yet, it's simultaneously in both states. So when you lift the lid, you're going to see either a dead cat or a live cat, but until then, inside that box are both a dead cat and a live cat.
Wow.
And so what we're talking about then is a way of understanding the idea that I was first thinking about back when I was 7 and running through that field, is there's a way that makes sense at the quantum level of understanding our reality, and that allows us to take it out to our physical reality around us to understand that all those different possibilities exist simultaneously in some state that is outside of our observed state. When I observed the version of the universe where I didn't fall and break my leg or end up in a wheelchair or worse, I was observing one version of the universe, but the other versions were still there as part of what Everett called the universal wave function of the universe. All the different possible universes then are being represented by a probability space that we are observing only one aspect of, but Everett insisted, and it makes sense at the quantum level, to explain it this way because it helps you to get out of some of the contradictions that seem to be apparent. He insisted that all those other versions of the universe are just as real as the one we're observing.
They just haven't happened, right?
It's not that they haven't happened, it's that you haven't observed them. And this is where we get into then the idea that I'm talking about, where if you're thinking of the fourth, fifth, and sixth as being the moral triad, then you can say that there is a version of the universe where I decide I'm bored with this conversation and I put the phone down and go running down the street naked. That exists as a possibility for our universe, but I'm choosing not to observe that version of the universe. And that's where you get into the relationship, not just between randomness, but between choice and how we are choosing to observe one reality over another every time that we make a decision. Now, a lot of those decisions don't matter. You know, if I'm driving to work and I decide to turn at 7th Avenue rather than 6th Avenue on my way here, I'm probably still going to get to work at more or less the same time, and my day is going to be exactly the same. So there's always this cloud of possible yous that you're traveling along that are all you, and so that's where you get into this fifth dimensional perspective again of thinking about how there's this cloud of possible yous that are all at the quantum level the probabilities for you. But if I had decided to turn at 6th Avenue this morning and had a car accident, then there would have been a branching off. And at that point, the me who turned at 7th Avenue would be a different me that I'm no longer observing. And Everett's theory of the universal wave function, or the many worlds interpretation as he called it, says that other version of the universe is still also there. And by the time you start to get to that, then you start to see how there already is a version where I've made better choices for myself that exists within timelessness, and there are versions of me where I've made worse choices, and I have to keep myself focused on what version of me do I want to get to.
And I think that's we can all look in our lives and find experiences of that, right? Or find examples of that in our lives, in our own lives. And so we can say that we aren't a product of our situation or circumstance, that we do have choice,
sure,
although it may be limited.
Yeah, there's definitely a limitation to it. You and I cannot observe the world where the World Trade Towers, are still standing. That has been removed from our probability space. So there's, definitely the actions of others are also influencing our probability space. But again, if I can have some control over the probabilities of the past just as much as the future, I can choose to let some things affect me more and some things affect me less. And that's where you start to get into understanding that these probabilities work both ways, and that your choice of where you're going to go from here doesn't have to be locked in by what happened before.
Exactly. And this is really important for us to come to a real comprehension and understanding of during this time that we're in, that there are multiple, various probabilities that could come out of the situation and circumstances that you're currently in at this particular point in your life, right?
Yes. And this can also be a comfort when you think about how a loved one who has already passed on due to some unfortunate circumstance, there is a version of the universe where that didn't happen to them, where they're continuing to live on in a happy life. That's quantum physics. That's, Everett's many worlds interpretation says that version of the universe does exist.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Okay, so my last question is, you've said that when we get to the 10th dimension, we're really back where we started, at zero, at nothingness. What do you mean by that?
So let's go back and think about that point we drew on the piece of paper. Yeah. And let's not call that point the first dimension. Let's call that the zero, the zeroth dimension, if you want to call it that. So what we're talking about there is a point. But if we're talking about geometry, that point is of indeterminate size. It could be any size you choose to imagine it being. It could be infinitesimally small. It could be infinitely large. It's still going to, the center of it is going to be right where you placed it on that piece of paper in front of you. So when we're talking about that, then we're talking about all the possibilities that are encoded into where that position of paper is can all cancel each other out down to an infinitely small point. And what we're talking about then is an underlying symmetry. And what physicists talk about is how our universe results from a breaking of symmetry. That if you think about the 10th dimension in the same way, then you can think about it being this beautiful, absolutely enlightened version of reality where all possibilities exist simultaneously, but because it's absolutely every possibility, you could also unfold that all back into that infinitely small point that you drew a representation of on your piece of paper. The fact that you can see it means it's not infinitesimally small. So what we're talking about is an idea here, not a bit of lead on paper, but we're talking about an idea of how at the 10th dimension, if there's nothing being observed, if as string theorists say, if there's no strings vibrating, then everything has assembled back together into the underlying timelessness that everything else springs from. So if you manage to get yourself into the 10th dimension, you're actually in the most boring part of the whole equation, because nothing happens in the 10th dimension by itself, because it all cancels itself out. It falls back into symmetry, the underlying indeterminacy that everything else springs from. What's interesting about the reality that we're observing then in the 9th down to the 1st dimension is that some of those possibilities have been tipped away from to create the version of the reality that we're seeing right now. And that's really what's so beautiful about the universe we're seeing right now, is that there's all these other possibilities out there, but we're seeing this one very specific one right here, right now.
Interesting. Well, that's great. Well, that's beautiful. That totally wraps up our time together here, Rob. I really thank you so much for coming on to the show. You're very wise. You're very intuitive. I can see that. And this information has definitely been it's very, like you mentioned, I mentioned in the beginning of the show, very provocative. I find it to be, because it really, you've explained a lot of things that have been, I've been wondering about, but because I'm not a scientific type of person, you really explained, and we were able to have some dialogue and discussion here, which was just beautiful. So I thank all our listeners for listening in, and for those of you who are listening in the archives, I hope you enjoyed this show. Rob, I really want to thank you for coming out today and being with us and sharing all your wisdom and insights. And if you can just provide our listeners with, again, details as to where they can find you and get your book, that would be wonderful to close out the show.
Well, yeah, if you just go to 10thdimension.com, that's where all the people have gathered to start from here. That's where those 6 million unique visitors have been. And that's where you can buy the book, and if you buy it from there, you can get the free DVD. You can also buy versions of it in a digital version, just as a non-copy protected PDF. If you go to 10thdimension.com/blog, that's where every 3 or 4 days I write a new entry that explains some of the ideas that I'm thinking about that connect to this, as we've discovered through our conversation today, this huge cloud of ideas that sort of surround this approach to visualizing the dimensions. There's on YouTube.com, if you go to 10thdim, 10THDIM, that's where those hundreds of videos are posted that, again, talk about some of the ideas and show videos for some of the songs. Twitter.com/10thdim is also a place where I have regular tweets. And we mentioned that other project that I created along with Marilyn E. Robertson. If you go to omniverse.tv, there's videos representing the first half of that book, which is a completely different experience from Imagining the 10th Dimension, in that it distills things down a lot more into just visuals and poetry, but but it's also something that a lot of people are responding very positively to. And Kerrace, it's really been a pleasure speaking with you. I think you've found a lot of good ways to interpret some of the things that I'm talking about, and I really want to thank you for the opportunity to be able to talk to your listeners.
Oh, no problem, Rob. And I think that you're definitely onto something. And with the amount of attraction that you've already garnered for your book over the past few years, and I can see that it's just a stepping point for you for sure. And I'm glad that we can be a part of that process of getting the information out there and getting your book out there to more people who might be interested in reading it. I find it to be a very good read. I'm still reading it, and but it's non-threatening. It's very easy to read, and you're a good writer too, so you make it interesting, which is wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Kerrace. You're making me blush.
No problem. So I wish you all the best, and we'll definitely keep in touch, for sure.
You bet. I'd love to.
Okay, thanks, Rob.
Miracles of the Mind, Heart Intelligence, helping individuals transform their energy to align with prosperity, accelerating the evolution of human consciousness while expanding our knowledge of the mind, soul, and body connection. Brought to you by Bigfish Energy Coaching Radio.